and welcome back to the Thinking Progressive podcast. I'm your host, Ron Rivers, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about affordable housing and generational ideals. Affordable housing is a problem that many areas in the United States are struggling with today. Housing prices and rents continue to rise while wages remain stagnant. It's a struggle that is disproportionately impacting our youth and our poor, one that activists and organizations in the United States continue to fight for against strong opposition. But why is affordable housing such a problem? In the world's wealthiest country, why do we struggle with providing housing options for all of our people? Today, our struggle with housing is less about economics and resources and more about the ideals of an aging generation. Property holders who believe that the best way to maintain their personal wealth and success is to exclude others from participating. It's a misguided strategy fueled by greed that will only lead to mutual ruin. Today, we'll explore why affordable housing is an artificial problem created by people and what we can do about it. Thank you for listening to the Thinking Progressive podcast. Affordable housing is a growing problem in the United States that's unlikely to be solved without a radical reimagining of how we think about homes. What separates it from other issues is that it is entirely artificial. And that's because the primary roadblocks preventing more affordable housing is existing homeowners. We live in an era of increasing urban migration that creates direct conflicts for the single-family suburbs of the past. These population shifts strain communities near urban centers, generating resistance to expansion. But it begs the question, are the economic advantages of one generation more critical than others' access to economic opportunity? Do existing property owners have the right to exclude others from stable and affordable living? I label the problem as artificial because it doesn't have to exist. Affordable housing is a struggle of will, not resources. It's a problem based on conflicting beliefs. One concept drawing from the foundations of the past, the other demanding transformation to meet the needs of the present and the future. Underlying these clashes is the larger class struggle. Achieving affordable housing requires us to let go of the idea that homes should tie to wealth building. It's a shift that would free us from an inherited history that binds our hands to solve present problems. But before we can do that, we need to understand better the people and ideas opposing the movement. What will be our philosophy of homeownership in the United States moving forward? Will we choose to keep the frameworks that we've been born into, or will we design something new that better fits the needs of people today? We have to wrestle with the ideas of how we classify homes. Should we treat them as an economic engine or reshape it into a new type of asset given the economic, social, and cultural trends of today? There are a lot of benefits of owning a home, but consistently increasing costs are proving to make that goal unachievable for entire generations of people. In 2020, millennials are reaching a point where homeownership and family building are becoming a higher priority. Unfortunately for many, the prospect of purchasing a home is simply out of reach. High prices combined with existing school debts remove the option of homeownership for large swaths of the next generation of buyers. Now here we have to confront the ugly truth about home prices in the United States. Housing affordability is a problem caused by artificial constraints created by local municipality councils. Greed and misinformation support these economic decisions that reject the growing cultural awareness of a shared sense of well-being and prosperity for each other. And, we really have to understand that housing is a market-based institution in the United States. That's really critical to the argument. We consider housing to be an investment. Anytime anyone invests in something, they hope to make a positive return over time, right? In other words, they purchase the home with the hope that they can sell it for more than they've spent on it in the future. Now, with that in mind, we can identify a paradox created by restricting housing to the current market arrangements. Considering housing as an investment to make money off of is incompatible with the idea of affordable housing. It can either be affordable or it can be an asset that increases its worth over time. It can't be both. Let's consider another form of investment to further illustrate this example. Imagine you own a stock portfolio. The purpose of holding onto company stocks is that you want the prices to go up after you've bought them. Ideally, you'll sell your stocks and shares for a dollar amount that is more than what you put into acquiring them. And this is why language is so important, right? The language really matters. When we label housing as an investment, it reinforces a belief system in which the purpose of owning a home is to expect a return through sale or rent seeking. If a home is an investment, then it's really no more valuable than shares you own in your favorite company. Your ultimate goal is for the value to increase to a point where you can sell it and retain a profit. This is why affordable housing cannot exist within the current market arrangements. The model of housing as an investment, it worked in the past because there was rapid expansion of new housing units, so it kept the market well supplied and prices down. But today, the housing market has yet to catch up with the expansion rates it experienced since before the 2008 recession. Considering housing an investment also supports a long history of structural racism here in the United States. So, for example, in 2018, there was a Harvard study done really evaluating the census, and it showed that 43% of Black adults owned homes compared to 72% of white adults. So it's unreasonable to call historical housing trends successful when the data demonstrates such a clear bias along racial divides. 2/3 of renters in a Freddie Mac survey said that they couldn't afford a home, and saving for one is difficult given their current financial status. Home prices in the United States are increasing at twice the rate of wage growth. And today, more than 10% of households in the United States are spending at least half of their total income on housing costs. It's a vicious cycle trapping so many poor, middle class, and younger Americans. Approaching housing as an investment will always give the rich ways to discriminate against the poor. We cannot raise the floor for our most disenfranchised if we continue to support the system as it stands today. The real problem with reforming housing is that the beliefs of men long dead bind our hands. Our laws of property and contract were established in our founding documents. But there is room for us to reject history's domination of our future. The founding fathers were very clear that the right to self-determination was reserved exclusively for white male landowners. The intertwining of voting rights and property ownership laid the foundations for centuries of oppression that would take root in the form of racism, economics, criminal justice, and others. Property was and is power. Classifying housing as an asset entrenches power in the hands of those who could take advantage of the housing market conditions that were significantly more affordable than the present day. And it also favors people with enough money to buy up homes during recessions, right? When in 2008, when a lot of people lost their homes, and they were bought up by investors to resell them at a higher rate when prices stabilized. In both scenarios, millennials, Gen Z, and the poor people of any generation suffer the most. That is why the artificial problem of affordable housing centers on an unspoken generational conflict. Today, the majority of real estate wealth is owned by people who are over 40 years old. The boomer generation represents the most significant property holders, with millennials trailing far behind all ages, with the exception of Gen Z, who's in their 20s. Homeowners tend to be older, wealthier, and have deeper roots in their communities, and they vote often. The majority of older generations are likely to resist change in policy, culture, and social norms. We see this all the time. Locally, they vote to protect their economic interests, and that translates to ensuring that their homes, in many cases their most substantial investments, are performing well. Today, the youngest boomer is around 56, and the oldest is around 74. Their children have children, and many are looking forward to or already enjoying retirement. With a life of relaxation on the horizon, It's no surprise that many boomers are re-entering the housing market looking to downsize their McMansions in order for a more manageable home. Millennial homebuyers are typically looking for the same thing. And today, our two generations are competing in a battle to buy the same homes, except one has a significant economic head start. Now, the result is a price competition that inflates the prices of new starter homes, pushing more millennial buyers out of the market. Now, census data indicates that people who live past the age of 35, their likelihood of owning a home will dramatically increase. And real estate blogs, if you read them, often predict that millennials will continue this trend of buying homes. They're just starting it later. But I'd actually bet that those assumptions are mistaken. I think the massive student debt, tighter bank lending practices, it's hard to get a loan now, continued urban migration, and a pattern of entering into long-term marital commitments later in life are all economic factors stifling home ownership to a point where I don't see it recovering as expected. Now, addressing the affordable housing crisis requires that we deal with communities attempting to protect the value of their homes through zoning laws. Zoning laws are enacted by municipalities to restrict the uses of property in certain areas. So that includes both commercial and residential properties. The rules intend to prevent new development and businesses from harming the community, right? And in theory, zoning laws are a really good idea. The ability of communities to protect themselves from large corporations is an excellent thing. Let's say, like, for example, a Walmart was trying to buy up open space, maybe there's like forest there, to build another warehouse of low quality goods. Communities have the right to deny that. In practice, though, they can be abused to racially and economically discriminate. Most large American cities and their surrounding suburbs have housing regulations that limit the number and type of new housing units that can be built. A lot of zoning you'll hear a lot about is single-family homes, for example. The result is increasing demand that's met with inadequate supply for housing, so near and in the cities, it raises rents. These practices disproportionately impact younger generations looking to build careers and the poor. This economic divide has given rise to the cultural "not in my backyard" phenomenon, otherwise known as NIMBY. It's the idea that while affordable housing might be useful, it's not really acceptable in our neighborhood. Now, common fears about affordable housing are that it'll bring drugs and crime into the neighborhoods. We commonly hear this, but what we don't hear a lot about that is just as relevant to these generations is that they believe affordable housing will lower the surrounding property values, reducing the resale value of their home assets. It's a belief rooted in racism, in classism, and otherness. Letting those people into our neighborhood will destroy our way of life and everything we've worked for. New construction projects are built near other people. That's what makes new affordable home construction useful. It gives more people more access to opportunity. Efforts organized to restrict building new multi-residence buildings such as apartments, condos, and high-rise units are an attempt to stifle change for personal gain. And as with many prejudices, the belief has little merit. Stanford University economics professor Rebecca Diamond did a report. She researched the impacts that low-income housing construction had on nearby house values. And her research showed that home prices in middle-class neighborhoods that were very close to the new development declined very slightly in value, about 2.5% over a decade. But our research also demonstrated that there was no decrease for houses a half a mile or more away from affordable housing locations. So that's a really small radius. Trulia, a subdivision of the online real estate giant Zillow, conducted a 2016 study resulting in similar results to Professor Diamond's. They reviewed a little over 3,000 low-income housing projects completed between 1996 and 2006 in the country's 20 least affordable markets, so the housing markets with the highest prices. And they wanted to determine if the construction of affordable housing impacted the values of the neighboring homes. The results concluded that with few exceptions, the presence of low-income housing seems to have had no impact on the home prices. So why do these fears persist when they are demonstrably false? One reason is that they challenge a lifetime of indoctrination. To understand this, we need to think about the world that shaped the consciousness of the boomer generation. The parents of the boomers are labeled the greatest generation, and many of them grew up in extreme poverty and World War. The idea of self-actualization was secondary to survival, as we might expect, and the values that they believed and instilled in their children, the boomers, reflected these ideals. Life was a pure competition, and there were no safety nets to save you if you weren't able to build wealth. Now, there's also the economic circumstances surrounding the development of the different generations. During and immediately after World War II, the United States experienced its most significant era of productivity and wealth building ever. This prosperity was fueled by progressive income tax rates for the wealthiest at over 90%. Boomers benefited from substantial public investment in social programs, infrastructure, and technologies, creating pathways towards prosperity for some. Ironically, these are many of the same policies that the generation now opposes. Opportunities in the 1950s and 60s were primarily available to white male Americans. Black Americans, women, and other minorities faced extreme prejudice, much of which is still felt today. The boomer generation is imprinted with the consciousness of an age where discrimination was normalized, self-preservation was the ultimate ideal, and society was productive enough where even low-skilled labor could bring wealth and prosperity over time. So it's no surprise that present-day boomers maintain these ideals. Whether it be consciously or subconsciously, though, is really up for debate. What the property-holding boomers share with other ages is that they are a product of their experiences. The difference is that the cultural and empathic norms of our generations, the millennials and Gen Z, for example, have deviated significantly from their values. The central philosophical conflict with affordable housing is a contest between empathy and economics. Exclusion and self-determination directly conflict with the evolving ideals of plurality and cooperation that we observe today. It's a problem central to the many crises we face today, but one so often ignored despite the weight it bears. If we're going to make real change, the kind that transforms our way of being, we need to address these ideological conflicts. Unfortunately, there seems to be little way out besides conflict. Right? Generational holdouts are unlikely to embrace change, but that is a path to mutual disappointment. The generations that should be buying the high-priced single-family homes are unlikely to be able to afford them. So what happens when your retirement plan is centered around an asset whose value deters future buyers? If you want to be part of the solution, you can get involved in your local municipality. Zoning boards set these policies. Running for local office like a town council isn't easy, but comparing to other offices, it requires the lowest financial and time investment. Thinking long-term, we want to develop and implement new laws of property and contracts surrounding housing. Imagine two different types of property classes. Private homes would still exist as they do today. We want to give people the ability to own something with more space and privacy, the option to do so, right? A progressive future isn't about denying people things. It's about giving people alternative ways to live. And some people are going to want private property and private homes and more space in more rural areas. That's fine. That's okay, right? But we could also imagine an alternative. The second class of housing would be a more robust and attractive socialized housing offer. Forget about the slumlord versions of affordable housing that are so prevalent today. These units would provide diverse and dignified living spaces for people. Residents would never own the property, but they would be contractually obligated to make repairs, and in exchange, rents and contributions could be subsidized federally. So we'd have a federal housing program. The idea is that if given the option, some people would never choose to own a home, right? And this includes myself. There are plenty of nuances to work out, right? This is where we're setting frameworks, not blueprints right now. But these options would allow us to customize our living experiences. Options could be time-limited occupancy rates. So for example, they might cater to young professionals early in their careers. Other options might be longer term and more community-centric. The possibilities are only limited by our imaginations. But really, the main reason to rethink affordable housing is that humanity will be better served when we stop believing that housing should be a revenue-generating asset. A safe and private space to exist is a vital part of self-actualization in modern American society. The generational ideals of the past are preventing us from becoming the humans we want to be in the present. You know, in the end, it may take the dying of the entire generation to facilitate this change. But the argument and the reason that we're discussing this now is we need to build a support base today to be able to facilitate this change when the opportunity presents itself.